Hey guys, what's going on? It's MassiveJoes RAW review, and I'm coming to you from MassiveJoes.com. Awesome! Raw review for the viewers at home today. One of our most anticipated raw reviews. I know there are a bunch of you watching now that have been patiently waiting across the planet for this raw review to drop. It's on an all new, novel supplement, nutrient partitioning supplement, glucose disposing supplement from our good friends at Blackstone Labs. It is, of course, Glycolog in the house. Let's get straight into it, show you guys exactly what's in it, tell you exactly what it's gonna do. That nutritional information panel ain't gonna get it done. We're about to go balls deep in this here Blackstone Labs Glycolog. Fortunately, got ourselves a big ass nutritional information panel for the viewers at home. Dilip, go ahead and throw. Actually, Dilip, you know what? Before we even look at the ingredients in this here Blackstone Labs Glycolog, my goal with this raw review for you guys, of course, is to go balls deep, because that's what we do in all the raw reviews. But I want to make this the most easy to understand yet most comprehensive review on Blackstone Labs Glycolog on the internet, on the planet. That's the goal with this. So in order for me to do that, because I know that there's a lot of reviews on this online, but most of them are so confusing that you watch them and you just have no idea what the this supplement is actually supposed to do. So in order for me to make this as simple but as comprehensive as I can, I'm gonna start off by explaining to you guys what happens when you consume carbohydrates. Because you need to understand that to understand nutrient partitioning and glucose disposal agents such as this Blackstone Labs Glycolog. So, what happens when you consume carbohydrates? You eat something, a food that contains, food or a supplement that contains any type of carbohydrate. What then happens is your body digests that carbohydrate, converts it to glucose, sends that glucose into the bloodstream as blood sugar. That's what happens to every carbohydrate that you consume goes through that process, ends up as blood sugar in your bloodstream. The question then becomes, how does your body deal with that blood sugar? And this is where we start to talk about nutrient partitioning, glucose disposal agents, and the role of insulin in the human body. So what happens is your blood sugar levels rise, obviously, because that glucose that's been sent into the bloodstream as blood sugar causes a rise in blood sugar concentration. Your body deals with that by secreting a hormone called insulin, which is produced in your pancreas. That insulin tells your body to take that blood sugar and everything else that's in your bloodstream at that point in time when your blood sugar levels are elevated and drive it into cells, drive it into muscle cells. That's the role of insulin. Insulin is considered the most anabolic hormone in the human body, but primarily it's a storage hormone. So it takes everything that's in the bloodstream when your blood sugar levels are elevated and drives that shit straight into muscle cells. So what happens with those carbohydrates, with that blood sugar? Three things, and they happen in this order. The first thing is insulin goes up, blood sugar is driven into cells, and that glucose can be used immediately for energy, by the cells for energy. So if you have an immediate use for energy, those carbohydrates in the form of blood sugar will be used to generate energy by your body. If you don't have the immediate use for energy, that driving of that blood sugar into cells can actually be used to synthesize or produce a compound called glycogen. And effectively what glycogen does, or what glycogen is stored carbohydrates or stored blood sugar for easy use. So I like to think of glycogen kind of like a rechargeable battery. So your body can store these carbohydrates like a rechargeable battery stores power in muscle tissue and certain organ tissues, your liver in particular. Your body can store this glycogen. That's the second thing your body does with carbohydrates. The third thing your body does with carbohydrates, if firstly you don't have the immediate use for energy, Secondly, there's no more space to store glycogen, or the insulin that you've produced hasn't been enough to drive that blood sugar into cells to create glycogen. That blood sugar will be converted into triglycerides and stored as body fat. That's the third thing that your body does with carbohydrates. And it happens in that order. So what we're trying to do with nutrient partitioning and glucose disposal agents and insulin mimickers and all the good stuff that we're about to go through with this Glycolog is maximize 1 and 2, which is driving the blood sugar into muscle cells to be used as energy, or driving the blood sugar into muscle cells, into muscle tissue and organ tissue to be stored as glycogen, those rechargeable batteries, so that your body can use that as energy when it needs to. And we're trying to minimize number 3, which is the blood sugar that's floating around in your bloodstream that gets converted into triglycerides and stored as body fat. You guys got that shit? Good. Now we can go balls deep. Dilip, go ahead and throw up that nutritional information panel for the viewers at home. Starting from the top, got yourself serving size 3 capsules, got yourself about 60 of them 3 capsule serving size bitches in one of these Glycolog bitches. So 180 total capsules, 3 capsules per serve. If you're taking it once per day, you're gonna get 2 months out of it. If you're taking it twice per day, it's a 30-day serve. You're gonna get 1 month out of it. Now we can get into the goodness, and I can explain to you exactly how this Glycolog works and what it is supposed to do. Starting from the top, we've got chromium as chromium polynicotinate, which is arguably the highest bioavailable form of chromium we have seen thus far in a 300 microgram dose. Now, what chromium does is stabilizes blood glucose levels, so stabilizes your blood sugar levels that we've spoken about. But more importantly, what it does is it binds to insulin receptors and super activates them. So much so that it's been shown to increase insulin potentiation by 8 times. So your body produces insulin, secretes insulin to do those first 2 things we were talking about, drive the blood sugar into muscle cells and store it as glycogen. And chromium binds to the insulin receptors, the receptors in your cells that are responsible for using the insulin that your body is secreting, and super activates them. So they're able to receive more insulin and use that insulin more effectively to do number 1 and number 2 and keep us away from number 3 that we've spoken about. In terms, in terms of the dosage, so the kind of common dietary intake for chromium is 25 micrograms to 35 micrograms, 25 micrograms for women, 35 micrograms for men. If you're healthy, when it's used to treat diabetes, it's anywhere between 200 micrograms to 1,000 micrograms when being used to treat diabetes. So the 300 microgram dose, I would go so far as to say, and definitely an efficacious dose. So far as clinical dose, it depends what the clinical reason for using it, but definitely at 300 micrograms, it's gonna bind to your insulin receptors and super activate them, which is why it is in this Blackstone Labs Glycolog. Moving right along, we then get into the Gymnema leaf extract, which is a Gymnema sylvestre leaf extract, which has been standardized to 25% gymnemic acids, which is what you're trying to get from the Gymnema leaf extract. Gymnema is pretty cool. What this does is it actually increases the insulin secretion, so actually increases the amount of insulin that your body secretes from your pancreas, and therefore reduces blood glucose levels, because the blood glucose, the blood sugar, is driven into cells and tissue rather than being converted into triglycerides in the bloodstream, which we have spoken about. Now, this is a massive standardization and a huge dose of Gymnema in the 1 gram, 25% gymnemic acid dose. What we have seen in clinical studies when they've used Gymnema, and once again, they've used it for like an anti-diabetic effect to get people who have trouble producing insulin to produce more insulin, is we've seen it dosed between 200 milligrams to 400 milligrams at the 25% dosage. So we've got 1,000 milligrams of Gymnema in this here Blackstone Labs Glycolog at the same concentration. So almost 2.5 times the maximum dose that's used to treat people with diabetes. Huge dose of Dyneema, definitely over and above clinical dose. Moving right along, I keep my note page I keep putting up. I need to be putting up this one. You guys don't see it anyway because Dillip is all over it. Moving right along, we then move into our bitter melon extract, 500 milligrams, which has been standardized to 10% bitters. Bitter melon is pretty cool. It yields something called polypeptide P, which activates the same process as insulin, which is elevating the function of AMP-K, but without actually using insulin. So it works the same way that insulin works without insulin. So far, where we're at this point in time is we've got chromium, and this is why I'm talking about simplifying this for you guys. We've got chromium, which is super activating your insulin receptors, so they're able to receive more insulin. You've got Dyneema, encouraging your body to secrete more insulin. And then you've got bitter melon, which is acting as insulin without your body having to do anything with insulin. So it's pretty cool. So far, that's what we're looking at. The other cool thing that bitter melon does is it actually blocks gluconeogenesis, which is the breaking down of muscle tissue from being broken down and converted into glucose. Not that that's really gonna be that big a deal because you're gonna be taking Glycolog with carbs anyway, so I'd kind of jump over that straight away, to be honest with you guys. Bitter melon, the dosage, this is a little bit tricky. 500 milligrams at a 10% bitter concentration. Bitter melon is usually consumed as liquid, consumed as like bitter melon juice or bitter melon tea, or usually in liquid form. Very rarely have we seen it in clinical trials being used in a concentrated form. At 500 milligrams, 10% bitters, we're talking about 50 milligrams of total bitter melon bitters, which is what you're taking the bitter melon from. I did actually I came across one study which used a 900 milligram dose of bitter melon, but it didn't specify what the concentration was. So it's kind of hard for us to say, is that an efficacious dose or a non-efficacious dose? To be honest with you guys, we're really not too sure. Moving right along, we then get into super berberine, which is a berberine cyclodextrin complex in a 300 milligram dose. Now, berberine, similar to bitter melon, activates the AMP-K pathway, so it acts similar to insulin, which is going to help increase glucose uptake to muscle cells, and therefore increases the amount of glucose being able to be absorbed by muscle cells. The other cool thing that berberine does is it regulates lipid metabolism and blocks the enzyme that blocks the activity of insulin. So that is really, berberine kind of crosses over with bitter melon in the fact that it kind of acts as insulin acts without being insulin. But the real cool thing that berberine does, and the real cool reason why it is put in this Blackstone Labs Glycolog, is there's an enzyme that blocks the activity of insulin, that stops insulin working, and berberine blocks that enzyme. So it says, enzyme, we're about to let this insulin come into the cell and do what it has to do. So that is a real cool function of berberine. The one problem with berberine is that it's incredibly non-bioavailable. So what Blackstone Labs have done is it's actually a berberine cyclodextrin complex. So it's berberine encased in clustered dextrin. So it's able to enter the cell because it's encased in a carbohydrate, and you're consuming carbohydrate, so your insulin levels are elevated, and the insulin is going to push that cyclodextrin encased berberine into the cell, so it becomes much more bioavailable than berberine in its own right. In terms of the dosage, the clinical dose of berberine by itself is 900 milligrams to 2,000 milligrams per day, split into 2 to 3 doses. So 300 to 700 milligrams per dose, but that's just normal berberine. And this berberine that we're talking about, as I mentioned, is encased in clustered dextrin, so it's much more bioavailable. We don't know exactly how much more bioavailable, so I'm gonna let you guys decide for yourself whether you think that's an efficacious dose or not. Moving right along, we then get into a cinnamon bark extract, a stupid cinnamon extract, 25 to 1, yielding 30% polyphenols. Cinnamon is really cool because what it does is improves insulin sensitivity. So improves your cells' ability to react to insulin. The usual concentration of cinnamon that we've seen in glucose disposal agents is usually like 4 to 1, possibly 10 to 1. 25 to 1 is just absolutely stupid. The real cool other thing that cinnamon does is it mimics the action of insulin in transporting glucose into muscle cells. So once again, similar to the way kind of bitter melon works, kind of mimics insulin without your body having to produce any more insulin. The other really cool thing that it does, similar to berberine, is it also blocks that enzyme that blocks the action of insulin that we have already spoken about. In terms of the dosage, cinnamon in its own right, so like just a standard cinnamon, like cinnamon that you put on your sweet potatoes and whatever else you put on your donuts if you're into cinnamon donuts, it is good up into a point, and it's kind of one of those ingredients where it's going to have that insulin mimicking effect the more you take. So the more the better, generally speaking, up into a certain point where it becomes toxic. And that kind of toxic point is around, well, depending on which studies you're referencing, is around like 10 grams in one dose. So at this 25 to 1 cinnamon bark extract that we're talking about in a 250 milligram dose, we're talking about the equivalent of 6.25 grams of free-form cinnamon, for lack of a better term. So it's a massive dose of cinnamon, but it's not a toxic dose of cinnamon, which is obviously very good to see. Moving right along, we then get into sodium R-lipoate in a 150 milligram dose. This is the most bioavailable form of alpha lipoic acid. Sodium R-lipoate, obviously a form of alpha lipoic acid. This also, similar to cinnamon, improves insulin sensitivity, drives glucose into muscle tissue, and also makes insulin more effective and increases the amount of glucose able to be brought into the cells. Some studies have shown by up to 89% more glucose uptake. And it does this through a different pathway to berberine. So you're starting to see what we've got here is some crossovers between these different ingredients. So some ingredients kind of cross over in the way they work with other ingredients, and then some ingredients cross over with other ingredients. It's kind of pretty cool and pretty interesting how Blackstone have put this Glycolog together. The other cool thing that sodium R-lipoate or alpha lipoic acid does is, as we spoke about at the start of this review, any of that blood sugar that's not affected by insulin and driven into muscle cells or muscle tissue used for energy or used to create glycogen is converted to triglycerides and stored by body fat. The way that your body actually does that is the blood glucose is converted to glycerol, is converted to fatty acids, and reacts with acetyl-CoA to produce the triglycerides, which are stored as body fat. What the sodium R-lipoate does is it blocks the enzyme responsible for making those triglycerides. So it actually stops the formation of triglycerides, stops the formation of the excess carbohydrates being converted into body fat and stored as body fat in your body. So it almost has this way of increasing insulin sensitivity and then also blocking the conversion of the excess carbs into body fat in your body. In terms of the dosage, 150 milligrams. This is probably the only ingredient in Glycolog that on paper is underdosed. The clinical dose of alpha lipoic acid is 300 to 600 milligrams. Obviously at 150 milligrams, it's well below even the mid-range of that. It's well below the lower range of that. So we would go so far as to say that the alpha lipoic acid in this Blackstone Labs Glycolog is underdosed. Moving right along, we've then got bioperine, the black pepper fruit extract, in the full clinical 5 milligram dose, and that's in there to help your body absorb all of these other delicious ingredients. No artificial colors, no artificial flavors, because it is a pill. And that's what's in it. So on paper, very, very interesting supplement. And to kind of distill the ingredients on paper out of the actual ingredients in this Glycolog and what they're supposed to do. So we've got ingredients that are firstly encouraging our body to produce more insulin. We've then got ingredients that are allowing our cells to receive more insulin. We've then got ingredients that are acting as insulin without our body having to produce any more insulin. We've then got ingredients that are blocking the enzyme that blocks the activity of insulin. So our body's able to do more with the insulin that it is producing. And then finally, we've got ingredients that are blocking the enzyme that's responsible for converting excess carbohydrates into fats. That's effectively what we're looking at with this Glycolog. And I think that's possibly why so many people get confused as to what this does, is because no one actually has said what I just said to you guys, what these ingredients do. There's obviously crossover between a bunch of these ingredients. Some of them do multiples of those things that we just went through, but effectively, that's what we're getting here, is we're getting these ingredients that are effectively supercharging our insulin, so that if we throw it back to what our body does with carbohydrates, the ingredients in this Glycolog are trying to get more of the carbs we consume to be used as energy, to be driven into muscle tissue and organ tissue as glycogen, stored as glycogen, and making sure that they're not being stored as body fat. That's effectively what we're looking at. In terms of the spread of ingredients, very good spread. I like to see ingredients that do lap over, because it means they're working in conjunction with each other. And pretty much everything in this Glycolog, from what we can tell, is either efficaciously dosed, over efficaciously dosed, apart from the alpha lipoic acid. So on paper, very, very cool supplement. In terms of how it tastes, how it mixes, at the moment, even in Australia, comes in capsule form. So we can't even do the infamous MassiveJoes taste and mixability test, because there's nothing to taste and mix. I will show you guys the size of the pills though. I do like to do this for capsule size products, just so you guys can get a bit of a feel for it. So that's the lid of the Glycolog. So you can see the pills are they're not that big. They're quite, you take 3 of them at a time, a 3 capsule dose. They're quite easy to swallow. They're capsules as well, they're not tablets, so the coating of the capsules is quite easy to swallow, so you don't have an issue in that regard. It's one of those supplements that in Australia, our Therapeutic Goods Administration, our government, hasn't picked up on and banned yet, so that's why it's in capsule form. They will eventually, and when that happens, we'll do the infamous MassiveJoes taste and mixability test. In terms of, like, sometimes when you take capsule form products, you can get reflux and that sort of stuff, that sort of nasty thing. You don't get that with Glycolog, or I personally haven't experienced, no one at MassiveJoes has experienced any reflux or anything in that regard. So really easy to take as a capsule form supplement. In terms of the effects, because we can sit here all day and talk about how it looks on paper and how it's supposed to do this with insulin and do that with insulin and block this enzyme and enzyme and all this bullshit. You guys want to know what the effects are, what you're going to feel, and ultimately, does this shit work? And that's what I'm here to tell you guys, because I have been using Glycolog now for almost 3 months. So I have used a shitload of it, and I can give you a first-hand report on what I personally have experienced with Glycolog. So let me firstly set the tone like this. I've been using Glycolog for most of my contest prep for the IFBB Oceania Pro Qualifier. So I used it for, what's that, probably the last 10 weeks. Last 8 weeks of that prep, and now for the 3 weeks after that, as I've been reverse dieting out. So I've been using it in caloric deficit, and over the last 3 weeks, I've been using it in caloric surplus. So the things that I have noticed, that I have personally experienced with this Glycolog, just to get away from the theory and get to the actual practical side of things. The first thing that I have noticed straight away is your muscle pumps are stupid. Like, better than any nitric oxide boosting supplement I have ever taken. Provided your carbohydrate intake is high enough. So if you're hitting, when my pumps were stupid, I was hitting probably no less than 75 grams of carbs in my pre-workout meal with 3 caps of Glycolog. And the carbs were the pumps were stupid. Just disgusting muscle pumps. Like I said, better than any nitric oxide booster I've taken. And obviously that's a result of your body taking that blood glucose, that blood sugar, and driving it into muscle cells so it can be used for energy. The pumps, man, just absolutely crazy. The one thing I did notice though is as I was dieting for the show and my pre-workout carbs came down and down and down to the point where I think the lowest I got was 30 grams of carbs in my pre-workout meal, that effect of the disgusting pumps did dissipate. So it will give you awesome pumps if you are taking in enough carbohydrates in your pre-workout meal. The second thing I noticed is the muscular endurance was also incredibly enhanced, even when my carbohydrate intake got very low, down to like 30 grams pre-workout. Even then, the muscular endurance effect was phenomenal. Once again, because your body is using those carbohydrates much more efficiently, much more effectively than it otherwise would be. So the muscular endurance was something that I noticed was definitely enhanced when I'm taking this Glycolog. On a kind of side effect note, it does make your wee smell. So you will take Glycolog and you go for like a piss mid-workout or post-workout and you'll be like, my piss smells. What's going on here? Don't be alarmed. That's Glycolog going to work. And I think that's actually got to do with the equivalent of the 6.25 grams of cinnamon in the cinnamon extract in there. So it does make your wee smell in that regard. In terms of the other effects that I noticed, I think really what it allowed me to do during my contest prep is get by on less carbohydrates. So usually in a prep, as my carbs come lower and lower and lower and lower, my energy during my workouts gets less and less and less and less and less. I found that by using this Glycolog, I obviously still had that effect, but it definitely wasn't as pronounced as it has been in contest preps before, where I haven't had the Glycolog to do it. So in terms of getting your body to use carbohydrates much more efficiently, my personal experience with it is absolutely fantastic. Now, going to more general kind of effects, general kind of things you can expect to experience from this Glycolog. And this is pulling on, man, most of us at MassiveJoes are using this stuff now because I have spoken so highly of it to the rest of the fam here. So they've taken my word for it and they've seen me during contest prep as well and how great it's been to me. So most of us are using it, and the feedback that most of us have given with it have been similar. Provided your carb intake is sufficient, your muscle pumps are going to be stupid, your muscular endurance is going to be stupid. Some of the guys have been taking it post-workout if they carb backloading or they get a big carb meal post-workout, and they've reported that they've noticed their muscle recovery has definitely improved. One of the questions that we get quite commonly is, when can you take Glycolog? So obviously it's designed to mimic insulin, increase insulin, get your body to use carbs more effectively. So therefore, obviously you want to be taking it with your carbohydrate-based meals. So if you're following carb timing, the best times to take it are going to be with your breakfast meal, obviously with your pre-workout meal, especially if you're after the effects of stupid muscle pumps and increased muscular endurance. And then if you're after something to help your body absorb your carbohydrates post-workout and help with muscle recovery, you'd want to be taking it with your post-workout meal. One thing that I do need to point out, I do need to highlight, is insulin, as the most anabolic hormone in the human body, as a storage hormone, will not only, and I did point this out at the start of this video, will not only take blood sugar and drive it into cells, it will take anything that's in your bloodstream and drive it into cells. So you really want to avoid taking Glycolog with meals that contain a lot of fat. So anything over probably 15 to 20 grams of fat, you really don't want to take Glycolog, even if it does have a lot of carbohydrates in that meal, because the Glycolog is going to obviously drive those carbs into cells, but it's also going to take those fats in that meal and also drive them into cells and store them as body fat. So you really want to just take Glycolog just with meals that have a significant amount of carbohydrates with respect to how many grams of carbs you have per day, but really stay away from taking Glycolog with meals that have a significant amount of fats in there. The final thing I will say about Glycolog is, because it's non-stimulant based, because it's really novel in the ingredients that Blackstone Labs are using, is you can stack it with anything. There's really nothing that you can't stack it with. So if you're taking it pre-workout with your pre-workout meal, you don't have to worry about what's in your pre-workout stimulant or your pump supplement, or whatever else you're taking pre-workout. If you're taking it with your breakfast meal with other supplements, you don't have to worry about overdosing on certain supplements or underdosing on certain ingredients. If you're taking it post-workout with creatine, HMB, glutamine, whatever you take post-workout, it'll stack perfectly with that. So the stackability of this Blackstone Labs Glycolog is really like nothing else we've ever seen. And that really ties into the fact that it is legitimately a new, novel type of supplement. But guys, if you're in the market for a completely new type of supplement, a glucose disposal agent, nutrient partitioning agent that is effectively gonna get your body to use carbohydrates much more effectively, whether you're trying to lose body fat and you're trying to use carbs more effectively and make sure they're not being stored as body fat, or whether you're trying to build muscle and you just want all of those carbs that you're eating as part of your diet to be encouraging your muscle building process and not being stored as body fat, man, you got to get yourself some of this Blackstone Labs Glycolog and give it a shot. Guys, hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, man. If you're watching this on the mobile, do not forget to turn your post notifications on so you don't miss a beat when it comes to the MassiveJoes YouTube channel. And guys, that is MassiveJoes RAW review on the all new Blackstone Labs Glycolog in the house. And I'm coming to you from MassiveJoes.com. Stay